on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council website following the meeting and archived for a period of 3 years. Our purpose is to provide greater access to council debate, decision making and encouraging openness and transparency. I also remind all present that local government decision making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. Just some opening comments about the deliberations. Consultation on the draft RLTP closed on the 24th of March 2024 and we received a total of 133 written submissions. 22 people asked to speak to their submissions and we conducted hearings in 3 of our cities around the Bay of Plenty. Thank you all to the members who attended those meetings. The Regional Council staff have considered all the submissions and have made recommendations on whether and how the submission should be accommodated in the Regional Land Transport Plan. We are today deliberating those submissions and recommendations. Staff will use our input to finalise the content of the RLTP, which has to be submitted to the New Zealand Transport Agency by the 1st of August. And then of course it is fed into the National Land Transport Programme. And I'd particularly on your behalf like to thank all our staff for their outstanding contributions to this process, for their hard work and their dedication. So let's move on. So apologies, I'm holding an apology from Commissioner Anne Tolley, Angus Hodgson from Kiwi Rail. Are there any further apologies, anybody? There being none, I'll move those. Seconded the Honourable Ken Shirley. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Items not on the agenda, there are none. The order of business, there are no changes at this point in time. In terms of declarations of conflicts of interest, I am aware that this panel is comprised of full membership of the Regional Transport Committee, and as such is just legislatively, that's a big word like Czechoslovakia, required to be made up of members representing territorial authorities within the region. While this may result in situations where members find themselves delivering on initiatives that may benefit their respective areas, our job as a panel is to collectively and open-mindedly arrive at the best decisions for the region as a whole. So, are there any further conflicts of interest that anyone wants to flag? There being none, if I could just draw your attention to 2 documents that have been tabled and put in front of you. They're a very late submission from Toy EDA. You've got the actual submission in front of you, and behind it the staff response to that. So our acceptance of that will come up later in the formal recommendation. So we're now on to the minutes. And there are 3 sets of minutes because we adjourned and reconvened. So I'm happy to move those minutes of those hearings as a reasonably true and accurate record. Commissioner Selwood, any comments, anybody? Matters arising from those hearing minutes? They're an excellent record of what transpired. There being none, I'll put them all as one, those 3. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. So we are now over to reports, and I think we are in your hands, Nikki and Andrew. Welcome, and again I reiterate and restate my thanks to you guys for the outstanding effort you've done in pulling all of this together. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Just to reinforce, the main focus of today is to consider the submissions that have been made to the RLTP.
Email that slow sometimes.
Sorry.
There we go. Oh. Yeah, all good. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you. Yeah, So to consider the submissions that we've received on the draft RLTP, to which staff have made recommended responses. So I'm very pleased to be able to announce that we can see the end now. We've been on a long journey to get to this point. We're now going to be deliberating submissions, and hopefully as a result of these deliberations we'll be able to make some changes to the RLTP, which will end up with our final document for endorsement by the RTC on the 22nd of May. After that, the document needs to be rubber stamped by Regional Council, and then it can go to NZTA.
Nikki, you happy to take questions and comments throughout?
I'm happy to take questions as we go.
And everyone, you know how I operate a meeting. I open it up to all political colleagues. So, but as we all know, if we have to take a vote, we all know who's going to be voting. But that's Councillor Scott, that's you, and Caleb, please note. Okay, keep going.
So since the RTC meeting at which which you approved consultation, there have been a couple of changes to the landscape. Firstly, the draft government policy statement on land transport. Now, the RTC is probably very familiar with this, having made a submission to the GPS. But really, to summarise, it prioritises economic growth and productivity with a good focus on maintenance and resilience, safety and value for money across all programmes. And it reintroduces the RONs, or the roads of national significance. Now, staff have made some changes to the draft to the draft RLTP to better reflect the GPS 2024. Those are captured in Appendix 1, which is the track changes document. The other change that's happened in the period of consultation is for the new SHIP to be released, which is the State Highway Investment Proposal 2024. And that includes a couple of major changes, some updated significant activity costs and phasing, and some new significant activities, especially resilience-focused projects. The RLTP has been updated to reflect some of these changes in Appendix 1, but decisions are required on inclusion of activities in the prioritised list. So we will get to that further on in the meeting. The other thing I wanted to draw your attention to was the long-term plans of the TAs, which are at different stages of development. And until those transport programs and associated budgets are confirmed, the financial details in the RLTP cannot be finalised. So to recap on the submission process, we went out for public consultation using the LGA's special consultative procedure in February, March. We had a total of 134 submissions, 22 submitters presented at hearings. A quick analysis of the submitters shows that 50% of them were received from the Western Bay of Plenty, with half of those being from Tauranga. 74% of the total submissions were from individuals, and the issues raised in submissions related to the draft RLTP and to a range of general transport issues. Now, this is quite normal because it's just an opportunity for people to get their points across. Today's deliberations process considers submissions, as I've already said, and the recommendations made by officers in response. So hopefully you're very well familiar with this particular layout now, having read through 85, 90 pages of it. But basically what staff have done is to respond to every individual submission point. So of 134 submissions, that amounted to 238 individual points. And just a basic summary of what our recommendations look like. Quite a few of them are referrals to other organisations because they're quite specific. They may relate to a particular roundabout or road or so on. Some of them are merely comments noted because we feel that the RLTP already does justice or covers those points. And some of them are acceptance of the comments, acceptance in part, which is where we're proposing to make some changes to the RLTP. Oh, and rejections. Well, rejections will be where we've either decided that they are not relevant to the RLTP in any shape or form, or that, well, there's no or actually. That's really the situation. They're rejected because they're not relevant to the RLTP. Quick high-level submission themes. The challenges, objectives and regional priorities were covered off. Those were the questions that were asked in the consultation document. And then beyond that, This is just a quick summary of the issues that were raised or the subject matter that was addressed in the submissions. So you'll see that rail's quite dominant, and there's quite a lot around improved bus service and quite a few GPS and some comments on the targets. Those are the main ones. So to go back to the challenges and problem statements in the RLTP were developed by the RTC and stakeholders in workshops in early 2023. I said it's been a long process. Consultation question that was asked was, how much do you agree or disagree that these are the transport challenges that the region is facing? And please tell us about any challenges you think we've missed. 82% of respondents either strongly agreed or agreed with the transport challenges identified, with 8% of respondents either strongly disagreeing or disagreeing. So I pose a question to the RTC. Are you comfortable with the recommendations relating to the challenges as suggested in the deliberations paper?
Seeking some comments now.
Absolutely.
Colleagues. Happy?
That's great.
Keep going.
Secondly, the objectives. This was the second question in the consultation questions. The objectives were developed by the RTC based on the Ministry of Transport Outcomes framework, and I'll emphasise here that that framework still endures. It has not gone. Consultation question asked was, how much do you agree or disagree with the transport objectives? Please explain. 72% of respondents either strongly agreed or agreed with the transport objectives identified for the region, with 14% of respondents either strongly disagreeing or disagreeing. Second question, is the RTC comfortable with the recommendations relating to the objectives as suggested in the deliberations paper?
Commissioner Selwyn.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to pick up on the submissions in particular, and this is my primary, I think, discussion point for today in terms of the alignment with the GPS. There were 10 submissions on that, and I think there are quite a few areas where the strategy could be improved in terms of its alignment with the GPS. I'll make the comments first by saying that we don't have to necessarily be aligned with the GPS, but it's smart to be aligned with the GPS if you're wanting to get allocation of central government money, which of course we are and we will be. The area that I feel that the strategy could be and the objectives could be improved in the area of the economic prosperity focus of the GPS. It is the government's #1 priority when they articulate the GPS. And it's important to note, and I think there's a really important change in the thinking around transport enabling housing, which is a key sub-theme of the GPS proposal. And just to give you a flavour of that, I'd like to read a couple of paragraphs from the strategy, if I may. So this is on page 10 of the GPS, and it's a paragraph that says, strategic investments in land transport, including roads of national significance, combined with the better use of existing infrastructure, will boost New Zealand's long-term growth prospects and improve housing affordability, making a material difference to our nation's standard of living. So it sort of frames what their thinking is. And then it goes on to say, New Zealand has among the least affordable houses in the world, the result of a persistent undersupply of houses. New roads of national significance and major public transport projects will unlock access to greenfield land for housing development and support greater intensification to ultimately improve the housing supply and choice affordability. That's the area that I think we need to strengthen in the GPS. And I go through the objectives that are on page 14 of our draft strategy. And under economic prosperity, it refers to regional and local international connections with efficient movements of people and products. I fully support that. But what it doesn't cover is the housing component of the GPS economic targets. And they specifically, through the GPS, refer to transport investment, be it public transport and or roading, and active modes for that matter, are there to, or should be made to unlock land for housing. That's the specific wording they use, unlock land for housing. And I believe that we should include in our objectives unlocking land for housing and having performance measures and targets around that. Certainly in Tauranga City, and I believe Western Bay as well, the provision of housing, and most importantly affordable housing, is arguably our largest single challenge. And the role that transport can play in unlocking land for development, intensification along public transport corridors, and or greenfields development to unlock new land is a vital imperative for certainly TCC, and I think many of the towns across the region. So I just wanted to make that point, Chair. And then just go on in terms of then the headline targets, obviously relating to that, will need to be amended. And I would recommend that we consider elevating the economic development. Not that there is any priority order here, but they are numbered from 1 to 6. And just sort of framing it around in alignment with the government's intention on economic development, I think would be worthwhile. And whilst in target 6, we mentioned the increase of the percentage of new dwelling units that are enabled within 500 metres of primary routes in urban areas. That's talking about percentages and mix. That's where I think the target would be better framed as saying unlocking land for housing, increase the amount of land that's available for housing is one of our targets. Those are my key comments, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Michael, do you want to make some initial comments on behalf of the staff?
So just to step back from that for a second and observe the process. I guess one of the short game and long game approach to particularly setting of objectives in this process is the RLTP is a representation of the problems that were identified in the region and the solutions or the response to that. Through these objectives, you are able to guide the prioritisation of projects that sort of float to the top. And I think that's basically how the system works. And to change that, any changes are possible in the document. I think I should preface that. One of the elements is that the GPS, it did mature in the time that this was produced and got more accurate. And I take the points, particularly around the targets, and they became clearer and that sort of thing. I think there's two dimensions which I'd like the committee to consider. One is the material effect of what that change might be on the list, and staff should have a view of that. I'm not going to give it to you right now. I'm going to buy myself some time and maybe give it to you later in the day. But in the same way, it's the long game too, is if this committee believes that issue is enduring through GPS periods, and I think there is an advantage to changing things to suit GPS, but enduring, then that is even more reason why you would change. And so if the committee agrees that this is an issue that isn't properly represented within the document, in particular if it does survive a GPS period of 3 years, and it's something that you want the staff and the transport professionals in this whole region to work on, then yeah, I think that's a very valid point to make. But I think there's a slight cautionary note in that, which is switching to GPS is very possible. There will be an effect, but if it, for my part, the level of comfort I think we would have would be particularly if it was an enduring intent, because that helps infrastructure, that helps all the things that you're talking about manifest with enough time. 3 years planning cycles are tough to deliver those levels of changes. So RLTPs should be, stay the courses, because infrastructure takes such a long time to get into the ground. So that would be my only reflection. Advice.
Back to Commissioner Selwood.
Thank you, Chair. And look, I don't disagree with Mike's comments, and I think to really reinforce my position, I think that there's no question that enabling housing and affordable housing will be a long-term challenge for this region and will endure well beyond the GPS. It's probably a 30-year mission, not a 3-year one. And secondly, I think it would actually strengthen the prioritisation given to the projects that we have. As you know, I argued very strongly for State Highway 29, the full package, to be included right on the priority list. And that is because the primary driver of that is both economic prosperity in terms of the significance of that corridor has an interregional link, but also the significance, and I would argue probably equally as important, the significance of that corridor to enabling joined up connected housing development at scale that would really make a difference for the city, when combined with the urban intensification along the King Road corridor. You've got a package there for the future growth of Tauranga that would significantly address the housing. And so, you know, we have already prioritised through our discussions those key, particularly that key project, but most of certainly the top 5 projects for Tauranga City are centred on urban intensification and appropriate greenfields development. So I don't think there's an inconsistency between what I'm saying and what we have already agreed. In fact, I think it helps strengthen the narrative around why those particular projects are where they are in the priorities.
Nikki,
Through you, Mr. Chair. The enabling housing supply, as you're aware, was one of the components that was used to score projects. So that in the prioritised list, it was very much featured in there. So I guess from an objectives perspective, we would be looking for some guidance from the RTC on whether they want to include some further recognition, I suppose, of housing, enabling housing at that level, rather than at the transport priority level, which is where we enunciated it.
I think part of the problems in timing is when the GPS came out, so now the government's made it very clear about the housing component. So Michael, just giving some guidance to you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, just from your briefing, can I just add to that? I'm wondering if what Commissioner Selwood is after in particular is primarily some beefed up narrative and possibly another KPI or two. Would that provide what you're looking for, or is it something deeper than that?
I believe so. I believe so, though I would want mention of housing in the objectives. I think that's pretty fundamental. And given that, you know, the balance of the report actually enables that, and our prioritisation enables that, I would have thought that was logical.
Yeah, I don't think that's too difficult. I think, as mentioned by Nikki, if we were to tweak the transport investment priorities, that would then have a flow-on effect to the prioritisation method and then the program. But tweaking the objectives and the wording to enable housing and include that wording would be relatively easy, and adding the KPI as well. So I think if that's where we're landing, then that's a pretty easy feat to get over.
And particularly affordable housing. So is this, dare I say, and being the spectre of the feast, is this regionally aligned? And I look to people like you, your worship, Mayor Tapson. Are you concurring with what Commissioner Selwood has suggested we do?
Thank you very much, Chair, through you. Yes, I've been listening to the feedback provided. I am comfortable with it, so if the majority is supportive of it, then that's fine. But again, I would just be cautious that this objective in focusing on housing does not deter the focus to the higher population areas that are growing at a much faster and more significant rate, because other areas like Rotorua also have housing that needs to be unlocked. And we constantly have constructive discussions with NZTA on what comes first, the housing or the investment. So I'm supportive of it going in, and I just, again, hope that it will be looked at in a fair and equitable way across the region, not just in the higher density or higher population areas where the housing is going in. But I am comfortable for housing to be mentioned.
Thank you, Your Worship. So it's about beefing up the narrative. Okay, now our time is against us, Michael. So are you happy to put your heads together during the course of the day and bring a paragraph or two back this afternoon?
Yeah, absolutely. And to make sure that spatial effect is felt across the region from the objective.
So in the interests of equity and equality and all those other beautiful subjects, other mayors have got a comment. Mayor Tunui, you concur with Commissioner Selwood?
Through the chair, happy to support that. Actually, I've read, not quite in those words. I think the paragraph is already there. I believe if we play this recording back, then Commissioner Selwood has actually articulated, it's mentioned everywhere in the prioritisation list and in the headline targets. I guess perhaps what's being requested is the opportunity to highlight it in the objectives, because it's actually been omitted there, but mentioned everywhere else in the document. Happy to support, Chair.
Worship Mayor Daniel,
I'm happy to support Commissioner Selwyn. That makes sense to me. Thank you.
Worship Mayor Luca,
I got stuck on the word prosperity. As in prosperity for whom? And also the issue of growth. Because, I mean, the problem is the growth. We need to catch up with it. But anyway, we can have a long ideological discussion about that.
let's see the words that come back this afternoon, so.
Yeah,
We'll make sure prosperity is not mentioned. Okay, over to is Worship Mayor Moore.
Yeah, I'm happy to support that as well. Thank you.
Okay, final comments, Glenn?
I just wanted to sort of seek clarity from the committee, because I remember the discussion in one of the first workshops. I can't remember who was there, but I remember Ken was there. And housing was addressed in that context of sort of predicting a new government, predicting housing. And the argument against it was more that it was a sort of a second level consideration rather than a primary level one. Now, I completely understand why Commissioner Selwood is proposing this and why it could be a good move. My question is relating to the type, whether it's just housing per se, or whether, and perhaps this touches a little bit on Mayor Luca's point, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's sustainable housing, whether it's just housing, because of course the transport implications for each of those things is quite different, and vice versa, you know, putting Mayor Tapsell's comment, which comes first, and when you've got a transport plan, presumably is sort of saying the transport comes first, but going back to that initial discussion around the development of this whole plan and the way some of the submitters saw it, which was that there were environmental and other considerations, and there's no way in my mind that we will, I mean, you heard my submission, so I don't think there's any hope at all of hitting carbon targets if you have a housing target based on growth. So I'm not trying to argue either way. I'm just trying to seek clarity in terms of this plan does not stack up if you try to be all things to all people. I don't.
Commissioner, you're talking particularly affordable housing, aren't you?
Obviously, my concern is affordable housing, but the issue is broader than that. It is housing supply to meet the market demand, of which the most significant problem we have right now is affordable housing. But so I am really talking housing rather than affordable housing, as is the government. And obviously, if we increase housing supply, then that will have even at the top end of the market, that will have a ripple effect further through the market. So in addressing housing, you will also be addressing affordable housing, though I acknowledge the need to focus our attention on affordable housing. In regards to kind of regional equity, I totally agree. And there's no suggestion on my part that Tauranga gets at the top of the queue simply because it's dealing with growth. So just to allay any concerns, that's not my agenda. What my agenda is about is addressing the housing needs of the wider region, of which Tauranga has a particular problem. And in terms of bear in mind, what we're talking about here is one objective in the context of many objectives, which seek to achieve the balance between, you know, environmental and social needs as well. So I'm not suggesting that, you know, this goes top of the queue or anything like that. It's just recognising in the objectives the importance of addressing our housing challenge within the region. So I hope that addressed some of the concerns. There was one other point I wanted to make, which I admitted before, but the staff may wish to consider. The table that is on page 17 of our plan has a table that says supporting sustainable regional growth, and sustainable is in there, which I think is an important addition or inclusion. Supporting sustainable regional growth through planning and investing in transport infrastructure and services that lift economic prosperity and enable housing. Now, I think that's a really good statement and would be a good objective actually. But Then I look at the priority investment and other priority implementation areas, and there are, I don't know, about 7 or 8 listed there, and all of them relate to the provision of public transport. Now, I'm a strong supporter of public transport, but I only talk about public transport, and so I think we need to beef up some of that wording as well, along the lines that I've suggested, enabling housing supply and land for housing.
Let's worship Mayor Luca, then Michael.
So we want sustainable housing, which requires sustainable transport, which requires a sustainable migration policy. And so they're all linked, and we could argue all day with the good commissioner over there about this sort of thing. But I'm glad to see that the government's taken the bull by the horns a bit and has finally realised that our migration policy, which is driving 75% of population growth in this country, is unsustainable. It's absolutely unsustainable. And that's why we're in the pickle we're always in with transport as well, because nothing ever keeps up, and the lag time that you referred to. So I just see the circuitous nature of what we're doing here today, but there's no easy way out, and we have what we have in front of us. So, you know.
So, colleagues, any other general comments before I pass over to Michael? Together, Michael.
And then through you, Mr. Chair, just to come to Glenn's points and some of the conversation, I think one of the elements, particularly in that first workshop around transport housing being primary and secondary in nature, it was this desire not to commit to outcomes that we have no control over. So whether housing is sustainable, the built environment is largely up to the councils themselves around how they regulate and they set rules and how they develop, and they set a framework for development in which transport exists. So I think what the nature of this objective will be is really set the role for transport investment. So it simplifies our job here, which is always a good thing. So the role of the transport investment should be to enable housing, and in keeping it as simple as we can, will enable councils and other approved organisations to use that investment in order to do other things. The further we go down into the complexity pathway, the worse it becomes for us, because we have to prove that benefit exists. We do know that transport does enable both economic development and housing and other things like that, but what this committee is doing is asking staff and teams and approved organisations to use it in that manner. So it sort of sets a role for that investment that should be prioritised against the other objectives in the document. So I'm comfortable that it's kind of specific and reasonably simple enough to execute and practical in nature, and actually is quite well represented in the prioritised list that we already have. And I think it suits the project nature of prioritisation, because it can draw from the wider region, because it is contributing to that. It's simple to understand, it's simple to prioritise, and I like simplicity in terms of that. So I think we probably could reach a nice middle ground there, as long as we get those words right and commit to you later in the day.
Nikki? Does that answer your question?
That answers my question, I think. There's no further comments on objectives. The third consultation question related to the prioritised projects. So this list of prioritised activities is the output of the prioritisation process, which we will go back over in the next couple of slides. That process was recommended by the RAG, which we now all know is the Technical Regional Advisory Group, and was approved by the RTC in August 2023. The consultation question that was asked was, how much do you agree or disagree with the proposed list of priority projects? Are there any other specific projects or activities not included here that should be prioritised? Not surprisingly, this was the highest level of disagreement reflected in the consultation responses, given that it's a regional document. 56% of respondents either strongly agreed or agreed with prioritised activities, and 23% either strongly disagreed or disagreed.
You've got more slides on this.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I'd just like to take some time to revisit the prioritisation process that was followed in the RLTP. And firstly, it's important to understand the responsibility of the approved organisations. In the transport context, AOs are organisations approved under the LTMA that invest jointly with NZTA in transport activities. So in our region, that's primarily the TAs, NZTA and BOPRC. The TAs and Bay of Plenty Regional Council decide which transport activities they're going to fund, including finding their local share in their LLTPs. NZTA's State Highway Programme is directed by the SHIP. Now, TAs can lobby for state highway projects, but ultimately NZTA decides where to invest in state highways. The AO's proposed activities are then submitted in NZTA's Transport Investment Online system, and the basic breakdown is it's either continuous programs, business as usual type activities, and the significant activities that we have been looking at in the prioritised list. The proposed significant activities are scored and moderated by the RAG technical officers from all the AOs for prioritisation in the regional programme. And the resulting proposed prioritised activity list is then considered by the RTC. So we've been there, we've done that. Opportunity there is for elected members from each AO to advocate for their particular activities. To recap on the prioritisation process, on the 31st of August 2023, the RTC approved the RLTP strategic framework and the prioritisation process as recommended by the RAG. The RAG members provided a list of their organisation's proposed significant activities for inclusion in the RLTP, with every activity scored between 1 to 5 against each of the transport investment priorities. As coordinators of the RLTP process, BOPRC technical staff compiled these into a single regional list. We then sorted this list by the raw scores, which resulted in a raw prioritised list. This raw list was taken to a half-day moderation workshop attended by all RAG members. The workshop enabled the region's technical staff to find the right balance across all the activities proposed and to remove any bias. The workshop culminated in a RAG-level consensus on a draft prioritised list with a resolution to take it to the RTC. The RTC considered and refined the draft prioritised list, then adopted it for inclusion in the draft RLTP for consultation. Are there any questions on that process?
So this is for clarification.
Yeah, really, it
information.
is. Yeah.
Okay, you're not seeking guidance.
I'm not seeking guidance at this stage. It's really just, it's really important that people fully understand the process.
General comments, colleagues? Keep going, Nikki. Yeah. Oh, beg your pardon, Honourable Ken Shirley, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Nikki. The process is very clear and quite involved and procedural. We've clearly got to a position where there's a perception quite of balance around the full region, particularly the west versus the east, if you like. And in a way, that's come about, as I understand it, through a failure to fully participate in that process. Could you just expand on where we got to in terms of the process throwing up that imbalance?
In the next few slides, we'll be looking at the specifics of the prioritised projects. Perhaps it will be answered at that point. But if it isn't, we'll come back to it at that point, if that's all right.
Okay. Any other comments, colleagues? Keep going, Nikki.
So as mentioned earlier, the State Highways investment proposal came out at the very end of our consultation period. The majority, fortunately, of the NZTA activities prioritised in the RLTP significant activity list are in the SHIP 2024. I'd like to note, though, there are some additional significant activities as are listed there. You'll see that several of those relate to resilience. There are also some updated SHIP activities, costs and phasing that have been provided, and that includes costs for Takitimu Stage 2 as a RONS project, which we didn't previously have. The other thing I'd like to point out is that Tarika West Network Connection Stage 4 is not included in the SHIP, as its proposed delivery falls outside NZTA's forecast. So it's forecast for 2047, I think it is. So 2041 to 2050.
Nikki, just pause for 1 moment.
Yeah.
His worship me then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have one query. I hope it's a simple answer, but I noticed in the committed projects, TNL Stage 2 was taken out. I think it was committed as a route protection project. Has it been taken out because it's just more than that now, or what's as a RONS? Can you explain that? That is the answer, is that?
That's my understanding of, perhaps David could.
Okay, I'm just making sure we're not missing out on it, capturing at least the route protection stuff, which is ongoing.
Dave,
Malek will probably say this in the next 20 seconds, but the one really important thing to realise is that activities in the State Highway Improvement Plan have to be in the RLTP to make it into the NLTP, so if they're not, then they're not.
Chair,
oh, beg your pardon, Commissioner Selwood.
I was thinking as I'm putting my hand up, but just in terms of the ROMs, I note your comment about Stairway 29 being outside of the ship timeframes. Once again, I come back to the GPS and it says all roads of national significance, of which Stairway 29 is one, will be four-laned, grade separated highways, and all funding and financing and delivery options should be considered to deliver them in stages as quickly as possible. And I think it's very clear that the government does not see 2050. Now, they haven't explicitly said this, but they don't see the late 2040s as being delivered as quickly as possible. My gut tells me that they're wanting to see them finished within a decade, but they haven't explicitly come out and said that. And that is also what Smart Growth is seeking, particularly in Stairway 29. And so that's why, in my view, we need to make sure that it retains its priority. I just want to make that comment.
Back to you, Nikki.
We accept that comment. It's, I guess we're just raising it as not being in the ship, and that is of relevance.
I just didn't want it to be seen as an excuse for changing their ranking.
So what does the ship mean for the prioritised list? Well, our recommendation is that we include the first two items that I've mentioned in the previous slide. So that's the BOP share RONS project development and BOP share RONS property in the prioritised list, and we include them up just under the Tariko package of works and above the Takatuma North Link Stage 2. Now, my understanding from NZTA is that these two BOP share activities are bundled funding for the RONS activities, and at this stage they can't be apportioned across the individual RONS projects. So we have to include them beside the RONS projects because they're actually an integral part of those RONS projects. It's just that they've been bundled in a different way from how they were previously. So the suggestion, basically, they're not new activities per se, they've just got a new name and the costs have been moved across the different phases. So I guess my question is, are we happy with the inclusion of these two activities in the position in the prioritised list?
Worship Mayor Daniel.
Yeah, I'm happy to include them and high up. I just do wonder whether we have a number of ranking number ones as it's a package of works. This looks like a slightly different beast, and we're in the danger of having everything ranked as number one in a kind of futile attempt to get everything really important. So I wonder if there's a more elegant way of putting this that doesn't look like we're just putting everything at number one.
Nikki.
I appreciate that it's starting to become a very long list. So what we could do is just to bundle them up as the State Highway 2929A package of works, which is the title at the top, and we could have some sort of reference down the bottom that expands on the various different components.
As long as it's in there and is, it's in the list that we need it to be in for the ship, as David has explained, and I'm happy with that. I just want to make sure it looks like we're being somewhat sensible.
Liam.
Through the chair, I just want maybe Commissioner Selwood could clarify for me, is the Western Corridor Ring Route, is it part of the RONS project, or is it actually genuinely a separate project that could be dropped to number 2 and everything else dropped down? Because it seems like the odd one out to me out of all everything else is a RONS related project. I don't know if that is.
I don't believe, and I'm just looking at David, I don't believe it is part of the State Highway 29 project, but it is, inevitably a really important project given its relationship to State Highway 29. So
yeah, I'm not trying to put it down, but more just if, in line with Mayor Denya's comment, if it's not genuinely part of the same project, it seems to me that's could drop to number 2, and number 2 to 3, and 3 to 4, etc. Before you all wrangle around which goes where.
I will be happy with that. And look, I think we could have State Highway 2929 package of works as the number 1, but then potentially with a footnote or a subsection that explains what that package comprises. I'm certainly, I mean, the area of concern for me is the timing of stage 4, which is the 4-laning piece. And that will be the government's primary objective, to enable that 4-laning sooner rather than later. So as long as it's included in that package of work description, I'll be very happy.
We're going to play around with this and rejig it, and it'll come back this afternoon too. Sorry to dump that on you, Nikki. I've just spoken to Michael. So, David.
No, what he said.
Just make sure your microphone's on for the people watching by Zoom.
What Commissioner Selwood said was my comment as well.
Keep going, Nikki.
With regard to the other SHIP activities that I mentioned previously, we're proposing that they be added to the bottom of the prioritised activities list as funded but unprioritised, as they've not been through the region's prioritisation and consultation process. This is an approach that's been taken in several previous RLTPs. Do I have any comments on that proposal?
What does Wainwright Tauranga Port?
Oh, sounds like a reasonable approach.
Pass. David, do you know what the Wainwright is?
So the Wainwright stations are essentially the compliance tool for heavy vehicles, so they can make sure that they are weighing right before they go on the road.
Oh.
Big set of scales.
Thank you. Questions or comments, colleagues? Nikki, keep going.
The other prioritised projects that we need to consider are the Rotorua activities that were put forward by Rotorua Lakes Council and several of their partners. These we have recommended be added to the bottom of the prioritised activities list as unfunded and unprioritised, which was an approach taken in previous RLTPs. So the 5 in red at the bottom are all the what I would call new activities. Do I have any comments on that proposal?
Yeah, Texel, did you want to make any comments? These are your 5 preferred focus projects. Both you and... Go on, sorry.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, through you. Look, I'm pleased to see them mentioned in there. And I think that this is just a reminder, you know, we've already talked about housing, but we also need to look at transport as unlocking economic development. And many of these items on here actually do that. We have significant industrial and commercial development that will be occurring in the next few years. So it is very crucial, not only for access, but also for safety, that Rotorua is able to have these significant road corridors improved, because we're starting to mix, you know, heavy logging trucks with mountain bikers, as an example, and workers accessing industrial and commercial areas, and it does become quite dangerous for our community. So I see these projects in particular as very much improving access connectivity, but also the economic development and, importantly, the safety.
Sorry, Brian, did you want to speak in support of the 5 Rotorua focus projects?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support entirely the Worship's comments and thank the committee for including those after the discussions that we had during the submission phase. So thank you very much.
Further comments, colleagues? Back to you, Nikki.
The only other changes to the prioritised activities requested were these 2. I'll leave you to read them for a second. With regard to where those priorities those activities sit in the priority list. I guess we need some steer from RTC whether the committee would like to see them changed in position or whether they're happy with the position they're already in.
It's worship me, then you're going into battle.
Oh, quite the opposite, actually. Much as I would like to promote projects in my way as far as I can, I think breaking the prioritisation process just to push my local projects would seem rather inappropriate. So I'm happy that we stick with our prioritisation process and keep it as a robust one and not try to do really pork barrel kind of situations.
Thank you.
Here is Rick Senatorial City Council. I'm happy to endorse the same approach in here.
Very magnanimous. Vicky, back to you.
Thank you. So my question now, is the RTC comfortable with recommendations relating to the prioritised activities as suggested in the deliberations paper? So the couple of points that we've just discussed, plus anything else that's come out in the deliberations paper.
Glenn.
Can I just seek clarity in terms of where there's not local funding in the long-term plans for those TAs? Like, what are the implications of putting a relatively high-ranked project without the same amount of funding that's in the RLTP?
Thank you, Glenn. The implications are that those projects won't be funded from the NRTP unless the local share is found in some form. They're obviously, the decision was made by the RTC previously that it was important to put them in the prioritised list so that they, I suppose as a placeholder, there was an indication of how significant they were to the region. But if there's no funding available, then it's unlikely they will be funded from the NRTP. There could, however, be some other source of funding in the future. And that might well refer to the RLTP to see how significant those projects are to the region.
Just want to know who worship near Tatzel, then is worship near Denia, and then back to Glenn. Your worship in Rotorua.
Thank you, and apologies for the simple question. I just want to make sure I fully understand. So the unfunded, unprioritised projects, and just also connecting to Glenn's comments just then as well, is that unfunded, unprioritised from this perspective? It's not taken into consideration that there may be plans or funding from the individual councils that are seeking these projects? So basically, what does the unfunded, unprioritised mean? It's mentioned, but it's not likely to. Yeah, sorry. Just a question on that.
So, Your Worship, if a project is unprioritised, it means it hasn't gone through the prioritisation process that I referred to previously, where it's been scored against all the different transport priorities for the region. So that's unprioritised. Unfunded means that it's been included in the list, but there is no local share funding for it. So at a TA level, that would mean that the TA have not put it into their LTP as a budget item. For NZTA, it would mean that it wasn't in the SHIP, as in it's not been included as part of their transport program.
Does that answer your question, Mayor Tatzel?
I might be able to add to that just a little bit as well.
Andrew?
For the chair briefly. So I guess that the compromise in that position, because it doesn't sound like a pretty picture, is that by having those projects bundled together in a list or a table within the document to note that they're unprioritised and unfunded, it's showing government that we think these are important and we'd like to see them in the future, but at the moment we don't have the local share or funding portion to support them. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. That is very helpful from you both. Thank you. Just to note that there has been feedback, like on one of the, sorry to delve into the details, but on one of the specific items, the council was happy to pay for it in its entirety. We just needed NZTA support. So I'm happy to have confirmation that it will be noted, but I'm sure that we could also provide certainty on the funding for some of the specific requests that came through in the submissions. But I think that's cleared up my question for now. I'm happy to carry on. Thank you.
David, did you want to comment? Okay, his worship Mayor Denyer.
Yeah, I did just want to raise one project which was raised by submitters number 96 and 97, and that was it says bring forward new transport connection from Te Puke direct to the Papamoa East interchange as identified in the AFTI Key Messages final report. And the rationale for being, it says referred to Western Bay Council, this project would need to be supported and put forward for inclusion by an approved organisation. I'm just wondering, would that make sense to put it in our list as unfunded and unprioritised at this stage, or is it best to wait till the next RLTP or something like that?
Andrew.
Yeah, so I don't know specifically which projects Mayor Tapsell was speaking to, but my point that I was going to make earlier was that we are able to vary the RLTP, so if funding did become available through an annual plan process the TA, then we could vary that process to then support a bit waka kotahi for that to fall out, for the main to fall out of the sky, I guess. But that funding needs to be provided locally first. So we don't have to wait 3 years. We can circumvent this process because that would be very cumbersome if we couldn't.
But would it be beneficial for it to be in the unfunded, unprioritised at this stage for that Te Puke to PEI?
Yeah, depending on whether it is unfunded for sure, that one.
Yes, it says refer to Western Bay Council.
Yeah.
So it's not been put forward by us as an approved organisation, but I've not managed to speak to staff on what their view on it is. But it is in AFTI.
Yeah.
For future, so I think clearly it's not going to happen right away, but
yeah,
whether it makes sense to have it in the list for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. That would make sense because, as you say, it's unprioritised and unfunded at this point.
Now I've got Glenn and Commissioner Selwyn, but Michael wants to make a point of clarification.
Just on that particular point, Mayor Denyer, is that it would have to happen rather quickly. We do need to make sure it's in the system and put forward by your AO. So it would miss the cut if we didn't have it in the system in the right way with the right information. So, but as Andrew's intimated, that we can always vary the RLTP downstream of this process and do a bit of a house cleaning exercise for some of these perhaps stragglers that haven't quite made it onto the list. And then we can do it in a methodical way there. So if there's no urgency there, and then we can potentially do that as a cleanup measure later down the track. So there's options, I guess, is what we're saying.
I think that what my other thought with that one is it might make sense to do that after the Te Puke spatial plan, which is currently underway, which will be done by the end of the year. So you're saying that it could be incorporated into the RLTP at that stage once we've got a head around exactly where it should go. And
I think in particular, costs, benefits, all the information that needs to come with a project to make it onto the list. I think it's very important that that work's done. And that just gives it more credibility and you know where it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, things like that. It's important for us in order to make sure we can prioritise it properly.
Thank you.
David, point of clarification.
Mike's sort of nailed it. I guess my question was going to be what risk is there that we have a very long tail of good ideas that aren't well formed yet. And I think Mike's point is exactly the right point, which is once we've been through the process of understanding the cost and benefits and what have you on a project, then that variation process is there. But equally, we'll be doing this again, relative before we can blink. We'll be doing this again. So, opportunities not lost. And the same goes for the State Home Improvement Plan. I think there are a lot of really good ideas and projects that we would have loved to have had in the State Home Improvement Plan, but they're not formed enough yet to have made it through that process. That may well be the case for some of the road projects, for example. Next time around, they may well be the ones that really stand out. But we've got to do that little bit of extra work.
Standing between us and morning tea is Glenn and Commissioner Selwyn. Glenn.
I'll take my time. Just clarifying as a general point back to that issue of TA funding of their projects, I presume like sort of two-part question. I presume that you will align what's in here with any LTPs, well, basically Tauranga and Whakatane, which have already passed through a process. Because I'm just thinking, like, practically, the Cameron Road project will have to have more funding attributed to it to match TCC's plan, and the what it was called, connecting the people, that will have to have less to match TCC's plan. But I guess my bigger concern, so just I presume that's correct through the chair. The second point is, with something like connecting Mount Maunganui is probably the best example, which is very highly ranked, a critical project, as I understand it, for the TSP, it's number one. But from TCC, and Commissioner Casella can jump in, it's a $38 million investment that's been proposed in the 10-year plan. And here it's got $250 million for the local component of that, whatever it is, $750 million project. And I know there'll be an NZTA co-share as well for the local share, but when you look at it, it's a hugely different number, 38 versus 250. And surely from an NZTA point of view, and David, feel free to jump in, I just look at that and I think that's a very complicated, uncompelling pitch, because you've got $5 billion worth of funding from NZTA going into highways around Tauranga Western Bay, and we've got this project listed at number 3, and yet the TA is not putting in its local share within the decade, and yet it's still sitting there at number 3 in this plan, and there are plenty of other projects just underneath it that are being pushed forward. And it just tells a very strange story to me. I'm just trying to make sure we're not missing an important piece of that picture.
Commissioner Selwood.
My comments actually relate to that. I mean, the dilemma that we have is none of us have enough money to fund the level of investments that was required under our current settings. But we are all exploring new ways of funding and financing the level of investment required. And certainly in Tauranga City Council's LTP, whilst we would have dearly loved to have brought forward funding for just about everything, the dollars didn't go that far, and it is our anticipation that measures like value capture, pardon me, value capture, road pricing, share of GST, incentives, and all of those kind of alternative funding mechanisms that are being considered by government will come to the play, and that is why we need to be very clear, in my view, about getting our priorities right, even though those projects might not be funded either in LTPs or indeed in the NLTP. They are still priority projects and will need alternative funding mechanisms. So I wonder if we should put a paragraph in there kind of saying that, to make that clear, because that certainly is top of mind in my advocacy for some of those key projects that are unfunded in our current horizons.
Pick up on that, Nikki, this afternoon.
We'll try for this afternoon. We can certainly
Paragraph,
entertain it. Yep.
small paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to adjourn now for morning tea, everybody, and we will reconvene at 5 to 11. Apologies, Michael had to slip away, but he's back in half an hour. We've got Andrew keeping the seat warm here, so join us for morning tea. You ready, Andrew? We convene the meeting. Nikki, still speaking to your last slide. Seek further guidance.
Yes, so to reiterate, are we comfortable with recommendations relating to the prioritised activities as suggested in the deliberations paper? Yes.
There are a lot of yeses.
Thank you.
It's not working.
It's telling it's coughing. So a high-level analysis of the responses identifies these main themes. The one I'd like to focus on mostly is the GPS. But if there are any comments on the rest of them as we go through, then please just ask. As already discussed, the new GPS prioritises economic and growth and productivity above all else. It includes maintenance and resilience, safety, value for money from transport expenditure. It reintroduces the RONs, and it proposes raising NLTP revenue from some other means, particularly through public-private partnership. We're expecting the final GPS 2024 in July 2024.
Just pause there. It's worship near Daniel.
I did have a question about the wording throughout the RLTP. I note that the legislation talks about being consistent with the GPS, and we in the RLTP talk about giving effect to the GPS. I just wonder if that is the right language we're using, or whether that would be incorrect to say that.
Andrew?
Yes, so the RLTP needs to be consistent with the GPS. So that's just on the terminology.
So, but we're saying it's giving effect to in a number of places, and is that a concern, or was that just before quite closely?
We can probably do a cross check against that and just make sure that we're not flying over ourselves from a legislative perspective there. But yeah, thanks.
Nikki? Commissioner Selwyn.
Just on the third bullet point, the GPS is quite specific about road pricing, time of use charging. And whilst it does mention public-private partnerships, they are not a funding mechanism. As such, they're a financing mechanism. The funding still has to come from somewhere. So, just important that we understand the funding is either tolling, pricing, maybe value capture. That's where the money is going to come from.
Thank you for that clarification. This was taken, actually, that's a direct quote. It probably should be in inverted commas, but it's directly from NZTA's website. At a glance, if we look at the RLTP versus the GPS, and bearing in mind that it needs to be consistent, the RLTP must be consistent with the GPS. The proposed changes are included in the tracked changes version of the draft RLTP, which was attached to your deliberations paper. Those are the changes to try and make the RLTP more consistent. We are proposing to add to that, though, further emphasis on value for money and funding constraints, which has been quite a strong theme coming through in the submissions. So if we look at the transport priorities that we have in our RLTP, We've got infrastructure and services for economic prosperity enabling housing, which is consistent with economic growth and productivity. We've got integrated freight system, likewise. When it comes to transport choice and inclusive access, we don't have a GPS equivalent, although the government, oh, sorry, no, I'm on the wrong one. In environmental sustainability, there's no GPS equivalent, but the government has signalled that there will be a second emissions reduction plan, and that's mentioned in the GPS. With regard to transport choice and inclusive access, there's no GPS equivalent for us in Tauranga or in the region anyway, because the PT focus is for rapid transit in Auckland and Wellington. And investment in walking and cycling is only where there's a clear benefit for increasing economic growth and for improving safety and demonstrating volumes of pedestrians and cyclists already exist. With regard to maintenance and resilience, we're very consistent. And with regard to safety, likewise. So the last point, which I can't quite see because it's Amanda's head's in the way, but it's value for money, which is, I think in our submission from the RTC, we felt that value for money potentially should be a lens that's applied to all decision-making across the RLTP, but in the GPS, it is very definitely an objective in its own right, or strategic priority. So,
just pause, Nikki. Glenn?
Yeah, through the chair, can you clarify the PT focus, what you're referring to? I know the projects that are listed, alongside RONs, in Auckland, Wellington, of course, but in terms of the comments from the minister, they have included the metro cities, and I thought Tauranga was a metro city, so I know we're sort of out of luck for Rotorua and Whakatane in terms of public transport, sort of any step change in funding. But I've written to NZTA, I've tried to clarify, nobody seems to be able to answer, is Tauranga, being treated by this government as one of the 5 priorities for public transport, or is it outside the 2 to 3 priorities that are because I've heard government spokespeople talk about it in both ways, but it does seem the wording up there makes it seem a bit starker than what I've heard.
it's not, Tauranga is not mentioned, or the region is not mentioned in the GPS with regard to public transport. So we've got no reason to think that we're not going to continue to get money for public transport, but it's the step change that you're talking about and the mass transit options. Now, David, you may have more information on that. I'm going purely from what's in the GPS, Glenn.
And I can't expand on that. It is simply not mentioned.
David has to slip away for 10 minutes. Keep going, Nikki.
But the RTC has made a submission on this, which you may well be party to, hopefully. So my question to you, is the RTC comfortable with how staff propose to reflect the draft GPS and the RLTP? Now, we've taken on board the comment from Commissioner Selwood, which related to the housing and a little bit beefing up on the economic prosperity as well. Is there anything else that the RTC feels we should be considering?
It's like a nod, Nikki.
Moving on to the other, what I'd call themes or issues that have come out of the consultation process. Is the RTC comfortable with recommendations related to other themes or issues as suggested in the deliberations paper?
Commissioner Selwood.
Just noting some of the comments I made before in terms of the targets and in alignment with the changed objectives, but subject to that. Yes.
It's worship there, Daniel.
I did note on the issue of ferries that we had a very interesting submission which proposed quite a different model. I think we as a group roundly rejected the earlier proposal, which was very expensive indeed. This one seems to be quite a different beast, and I just wonder whether basically rejecting it, as I recall, is the right response.
Andrew, point of clarification.
Yeah, through the chair. So the rejection is that it's rejected from an RLTP's perspective because it doesn't have local funding. But council is actively looking at the model going forward, and that might be in some sort of private-public partnership. So while it's rejected here, it's only rejected here because of that funding element.
Right, that's really helpful to hear, thank you.
Paper coming later in the month on various.
Correct. Yeah.
Keep going, Vicky.
The next steps from here. So after this deliberations meeting, the amendments we will make to the RLTP and will circulate to the RTC. We would hope then that the RTC would endorse a final plan on the 22nd of May and recommend to Regional Council that it adopt the RLTP. That would be around the 17th of June. And then submission of the document to NZTA on the 1st of August, with the NLTP, once they've done national moderation, out in September. And then I guess it's an ongoing delivery of the programme and consideration by the RTC of how things are going and monitoring performance. And then we start preparing for the next one.
God help us.
And do I sound super enthusiastic?
Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Just one more point from me, Nikki, and I think we should probably share that table that we've rejigged just to make sure that everyone's happy with that reordering. Just going back to that list in terms of having repackaged 29A and how we're looking to include those bond shares and what that does to the rest of the list. We're the only, sorry. Yeah, we can just flip that slide to Amanda and yeah, with this one moment, just want to make sure that we're all happy with where that lands because we'll come to the 22nd of May and don't want it to be a surprise at the end. I'd rather work through it today.
Let's talk amongst yourselves for a minute.
By email.
Come back to it, Andrew.
I'll do it. So it's just a way.
Through the chair, Nikki, do you mind maybe just kicking us off here with outlining what changes have been made due to the discussion that we had earlier around the package of works and what that does to those couple of other projects there?
Right, so what we've done is we've just amalgamated the State Highway 29 related projects into a package of works at position 1. There's an asterisk there which will relate to the full bundle described at the bottom of the table. Number 2 then becomes Western Corridor Ring Route. That's a TCC project. And Takatimu North Link moves up to position 3. So everybody moves up 1 as a result of that.
So, I thought TNL2 was number 2 previously. Has that switched around?
The Western one came out of the package because it wasn't on loans.
Yep.
I see. So
Yeah, so previously it was part of the TN, we had it down as part of the 2929A project. but actually it's still related to it and it's still enabling it, but it's just not part of the RONS project.
Yes.
So we may have to, it's a little bit complex, so we may have to put some kind of referencing on it so that you people understand that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could make it 1A.
Or 3B.
Yeah, that's not a bad option, Mike.
But we'll have a look at it and we'll see how best we can present it.
Yeah, but I just wanted to make sure that we were clear that there was some changes there to make sure that we're all happy. So thanks for that.
Glenn, then Commissioner Selwood.
Just sort of through the chair to Commissioner Selwood, can you just clarify, is that what's now the number 2 ranked project in the Bay Committee, has that got a TCC, a full long-term plan commitment for the full TCC share of that project, or is that similar to the Connecting Mount one?
Commissioner Selwood, one of the TCC staff, come up. Welcome.
Yeah, simple answer is yes, it is part of the TCC LTP. I'll confirm the numbers for you, but it is definitely there.
Back to Commissioner Selwood. Save there in case you need it again. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. But we are putting a footnote describing what the Stanaway 29 package of works are.
Yeah.
That's that funny little asterisk that you can see it.
Oh, yes, sorry. I missed it.
Underneath package. Any other questions? Moving on, Nikki.
We're at the end of the presentation, Councillor Thurston, so I'm open to any more questions and comments, but otherwise really appreciate the time people have put into reading through the vast amount of submission material. It's been really valuable and it will give really good flavour to the RLTP.
I was just wondering if you could scroll down to further. Like about position 12.
It's just a snap.
Oh, that's all it is, just a cut out go, right?
So on to the submissions proper.
No,
No, orders, you don't need it.
no,
We're all
there.
done and dusted.
We're all done and dusted. What we do need to do though is to go through the recommendations for the meeting.
Okay, the resolution,
Oh, sorry.
the resolutions, okay, so there is a resolution, everybody. Sorry, it's gonna, hold on, Amanda's gonna bring it up for you. It's got the additional one pertaining to the Eastern Bay. It's okay. Take your time. So there are the resolutions. With the additional one there of number 2 pertaining to the Eastern Bay. Have I got a mover in a second then? A couple of minutes just to read them. I'll lead us through those, just speak to them, Nikki in particular.
Sure. So the first one is just to receive the report. The second is in relation to the late submission from Toya DA, which was tabled at the start of the meeting. The third is probably the most pertinent. It's endorsing the proposed changes to the draft RLTP document as outlined in the track changes in the draft attached as attachment 1 to your deliberations report, and the recommendations made by staff in the response to submitters report attached as attachment 2. The fourth is to delegate to the manager transport planning the authority to make any further minor alterations or corrections to the draft RLTP during finalisation of the document, including revision of financial tables as a result of changes to TA's long-term plans and to the SHIP. And the final one is recommend consideration of the draft final document for endorsement at the Regional Transport Committee meeting on the 22nd of May. Now, there was an error in your report, it said the 28th, so that's been revised.
Also moved. Okay, it's been moved by the Honourable Ken Shirley and His Worship Mayor Denia.
I have a second. I'm having a second, but I just did have a quick question. Are we confident that recommendation 4 incorporates the changes we've discussed this morning?
Well, Michael, things have moved pretty fast since you left. You might have been sit up here with us. We've compressed 2 days of meetings into
Fantastic.
so you had some issues around the objectives that you were going to be looking at, you and the team, so we can't keep these good people here sitting around for that. Can we communicate that by email to everybody?
Absolutely.
As if everyone's agreeable to that? And you'll all have tomorrow off to go.
Chair, I'm agreeable to that, but I just wonder if it should be noted in 3 in some way. Because what I'm suggesting, I think, is a little bit wider changes.
What's the word?
Endorses proposed changes to the draft regional transport plan as outlined in the track changes and in discussion at this meeting.
Hold on, Amanda's just going to have.
Saying that for resolutions, that as it stands, because it has to include all of that, and then so you want another one or add some words to the end of that one.
Maybe put a between 3 and 4.
3A.
3A.
I just add the words. Everyone's agreeable.
Yeah, I think you better just keep it as part of 3 to reflect the discussion of the meeting today.
I'm happy with that.
I think that's tied in.
About as noted in the meeting and outlined in the track changes.
Okay, that's been moved, seconded. So it's been moved by the Honourable Ken Shirley, it's seconded by His Worship Mayor Denia. Are there any further speakers for or against those resolutions? Being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you everyone for your attendance today. And Michael, can you just lead us through the process here on, and for you and the team having a look at those, or Andrew, looking at the objectives and circulating those, and particularly picking up on those comments that were highlighted by Commissioner Selwood.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cliff. We've wrapped those notes together into a list of to-do actions which will come and be included in that recommendation form, and we'll circulate those paragraphs and changes to the objective and the KPI and those other things that we spoke about as well. So you'll see an email from us probably within the week, and we'll get those changes made to the final document as before the 22nd of May. And then obviously on the 22nd of May, the RTC will endorse the document before it goes to the Regional Council for sign off and get sent to our mates at Rockera. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments, colleagues? Your Worship Mayor Tunui.
Thank you through the chair. It's just in regards to a recommendation 2 that's just been passed and receiving the late submission from Toi EDA. There are a number of projects where a decision has been sought. I'm happy to pick that conversation up with Mayor Moore. There's a reference to the Putawaki Industrial Zone, the Opotiki Hub development and offshore mussel farm. We have an opportunity to share the very robust process that's undertaken by this committee. It's not a secret that, particularly in regards to the Putawaki Industrial Zone, that a number of works have already been undertaken with Provincial Growth Fund support. For those who travel into Kawerau, the roundabout is in place and there are a number of roads that are already there. So we have an opportunity to educate our colleagues about actually the very robust processes that are undertaken to bring priority projects to the floor, and invite our colleagues from our Economic Development Agency to bring those forward in our Eastern Base Spatial Plan, Chair. And also just to note that apologies from Kawerau District Council for the 22nd of May, rather fortuitously or unfortunately, that date has already been committed. It was committed in October last year for a meeting. So we're going to trust that all the wonderful amendments, corrections, additions, and conversation from today are going to be well captured by the team. Good work from the team, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you again to everybody for your contributions. Now, Michael, this is not your last meeting before you go over to the dark side at the end of the month, is it? No. So we'll get an opportunity to farewell you later in the month. But no, thanks again to the staff in particular and to you too, Amanda, for pulling all of this together. So there you go. You can have the rest of the day off, everybody, and you can have tomorrow off too. So find something to do, fill in your day. Thanks so much, everybody.